Ms. Howard Coroma, if I get you to announce.
Thank you, Your Honor. Brenda Howard Karama, attorney for CPS.
And Mr. Garvey.
Calvin Garvey, attorney ad litem for Ms. Campbell.
And Mr. Longoria.
Stephen Longoria, attorney for Charles Holmes, who's there.
And Ms. Wagner.
Sarah Wagner, attorney for the child.
Okay, so Ms. Howard Coroma, how many witnesses will you have and who are they?
Your Honor, I will be calling the caseworker assigned to the case as well as the voluntary CASA advocate.
And Mr. Garvey.
No witnesses.
And Mr. Longoria.
Maybe Mr. Holmes, Judge.
And Ms. Wagner.
No witnesses, Your Honor.
Deborah Lee.
And are you currently assigned to the case involving the family for the child Charles Holmes?
Yes.
And could you tell the court where Charles is currently living?
He is in a foster home.
And how old is Charles?
He's 2 years old.
How is he doing in his foster home placement?
He's doing well. He's bonded with the family. He enjoys a lot of age-appropriate toys, games, and activities. And he's meeting all his developmental milestones.
Does he have any special medical needs?
No.
And is he on any type of medication at this time?
No.
And could you tell the court whether or not the family is visiting with the child?
They visit with the child once a week, supervised by CPS at a CPS office.
And do you have any personal knowledge as to how those visits are going?
Yes, I do.
And how would you describe the visits between the child and the parents?
The parents' visits are very inconsistent.
And when you say inconsistent, could you give me an example of what you mean by that?
Well, let me start with Mr. Holmes. We started supervised visitation at the CPS office with CPS supervising the first part of January. Actually, this one is for Peaches Campbell. I'm sorry. I apologize. Miss Campbell's had 3 visits.
And what period of time?
Since January the 8th of 21.
And is there any reason why, or do you have any information as to why there hasn't been more visits than that from Ms. Campbell?
Yes, ma'am. They must notify me 24 hours in advance of their intent to attend the visit. On 1/8/21, Ms. Campbell was present. On 1/15/21, she failed to confirm the visit. On 1/22, she was present. On 1/29, she called to confirm the visit and then canceled, stating she had to work. On 2/5, Ms. Campbell failed to confirm the visit. On 2/11, Ms. Campbell canceled the visit because she had a dentist appointment. On 2/18, she canceled the visit. I don't know the reasoning. On 3/5, Ms. Campbell did not confirm. On 3/12, she did not confirm. On 3/19, she did not confirm. On 3/26, she called to confirm and then sent a text message stating that she had a flat tire and would not be present. On 4/1, Ms. Campbell did not confirm. On 4/8, Ms. Campbell did not confirm.
Now, when you say that a parent does not confirm, how does that affect the visit?
They need to notify me 24 hours in advance of their intent to be at the visit so that we don't bring the child and neither parent show up.
So how
And
do
if
how do they make contact with you, Ms. Lee?
They can text me, they can phone me, they can email me.
And what happens if they fail to contact you within the 24-hour time period?
We don't transport the child to the visit.
And who would be the normal transporter when we have a child this age?
For this child, it's Sandra Salazar.
And is that the foster parent?
No,
Okay. Is that one of the department's transporters?
yes, it is.
Okay. So to avoid unnecessary transportation, in this case, we know that the child doesn't go to school, but to avoid any child missing school, you try to keep a 24-hour window for notice that they intend to execute their visitation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so what about the father? How is his visitation going? For instance, if he had scheduled 10 visits, how many did he make?
Okay, he's made 3 out of the scheduled 14.
Okay. And have you had any contact with him to indicate that he had any kind of transportational, medical, or any other problems that would have prevented him from making his visits?
He doesn't state why he's not attending. I'm assuming it's probably because of work.
Okay. And so what is the department's current goal for the family in the Holmes case?
Unrelated adoption.
And based upon it being unrelated adoption, could you give the court a brief synopsis as to what services the family is to be completing per order of the court and how each parent is doing in their services?
Okay, Miss Campbell was to complete substance abuse assessment and follow all recommendations. She was unsuccessfully discharged from substance abuse therapy for failure to attend. The parents are to present for random drug testing. Miss Campbell, this is a long list, but Miss Campbell has failed to report psychological evaluation for
Okay.
Miss Campbell and follow all recommendations.
Mm-hmm. Compliant or not compliant?
She did get the psychological evaluation, but she did not complete the recommendations. Parenting.
What were the recommendations that she didn't complete?
The recommendations she didn't complete were domestic violence assessment, individual counseling, and family counseling, and outpatient substance abuse therapy.
Okay, thank you.
She was to take parenting education, and I have not received a certificate of completion. She is to provide proof of income and housing to the department. The department does have proof of housing, however, we do not have proof of income. She is to avoid all criminal activities, and currently Ms. Campbell does have an active warrant for her arrest. She's to stay in contact with the department twice a month. She is not in compliance.
And what about the father in this case? Are his services similar to those you just listed out for the mother?
Yes, they are similar.
What is the difference?
There's not a lot of difference.
Okay, well, could you tell me what service he is to do and whether he is compliant?
He is compliant with all services except for, it has been reported he is currently doing his domestic violence, but the report is pending.
And where do you get that report from?
From the service provider, which is Best Group.
And Best Group has not at this time notified CPS as to whether or not the father has done the service there?
Well, he did get the assessment, And he's been issued 8 counseling sessions, and I believe he's attended 1, but I do not have a report.
And so just to follow up again, once again, what's the goal for this family?
Unrelated adoption.
Thank you. Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Mr. Garvey?
Yes, ma'am. I have a question for you. Now, these visits that you're talking about, they're on Friday during the week, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if an individual is working, that means every Friday they would have to take off, correct?
Yes, sir.
And if they have a new job, that might be a little difficult to take off every Friday, correct?
You can usually work it out with your employer because the visit's only an hour long.
Well, if the employer is willing to allow you to do that, but if you're a new employee, they may not allow you that, correct?
Sir, I don't have any idea what kind of employer we're talking about. I really can't answer that.
Okay. Now, previously, her visits were on the weekends, correct?
Her visits were supervised by placement at the placement's residence, and placement has since determined that she is not willing or able.
With all due respect, ma'am, the question I asked you was, were her previous visits on the weekend?
No, sir, they were whenever the parents wanted to show up. Sometimes it was during the week, sometimes it was weekends.
Now, you said that there's some kind of mysterious warrant or something out there for her. What is their warrant for?
Theft by check.
Do you know what county that's in?
It's out of Austin County.
Okay. Now, this BES where she's supposed to be going, isn't it true that you were supposed to send something to them in March?
Let me check my records here. I have sent them 2054s more than once.
And you're aware that they said they just received that from you?
I sent them a 2054 August the 10th of 20. I sent them a 2054 on January the 15th of 21.
Okay, so if they were saying they just received one for the first time, that would be inaccurate.
Sir, the 2054s have an expiration date on them. They're not good indefinitely. So what they may have been referring to is the 2054 that I issued had expired.
Okay, pass the witness.
Mr. Longoria?
Thank you, Judge. Ms. Lee, if I recall, in the last hearing we had on the homes, I believe you had reported that Charles Holmes had completed most of everything of all of his services. Is that right?
By most of everything, that's kind of vague, but the thing that he has left to do is his domestic violence therapy.
And I agree that was vague, but I just want to make sure because we kind of went over Peaches line by line, and then we went over Mr. Campbell's just kind of vaguely all of them. So yes, I understand. So he completed the substance abuse assessment and the therapy. He's completed the psychological evaluations, the recommendations. He's done the parenting education. Is that correct?
It's correct, except the psychological recommendations, part of that was the domestic violence, which he's currently, so he has not really completed that.
Understood. So psychological evaluations, he completed the evaluation, their recommendation, one of them was domestic violence. And he's, as we said, he's starting to do that now. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if I recall, when we were talking about Mrs. Campbell, you said as far as the psychological evaluation, and if this refers to Mr. Campbell as well, there was a subset of recommendations, which was domestic violence, individual counseling, and substance abuse therapy. Is that correct? Does that all go under psychological evaluations?
Are you asking me about Mr. Holmes or Miss
Yes.
Campbell?
Mr. Holmes? Or were these things that he had to complete under the psychological recommendations?
His were domestic violence, substance abuse therapy, random drug testing, and parenting.
Okay. Other than the domestic violence, he's completed the other things you just listed. Is that correct?
Yes, random drug testing is still ongoing.
I understood. Understood. Okay. So again, everything's completed except for the domestic violence portion.
Yes,
Okay. And I think you and I exchanged emails, Mr. Mr. Holmes, and we've got him going into the domestic violence program with Best Group, and you're waiting on a report. Is that correct?
yes.
Now, do you get a report? You said there were 8 sessions. Do you get a report after each session, or after half, or after 8? What do you mean by getting a report?
Okay, I want to clarify the 8 sessions. That's what they requested to begin with. They may request more at a later date.
Okay.
It's not tied into 8. And I receive a report once a month on all therapy sessions that occurred in the previous month.
Okay. So kind of a how's he doing, and if he's reporting and doing what he's supposed to type thing.
Yes,
Okay. All right. As far as random drug testing, if I recall, Mr. Holmes has taken 2 recent hair follicle testing and they have come back negative. Is that correct?
yes, sir, that is correct. There was one in
Okay.
February and one in April.
And so that's really good news. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So as far as a home visit is concerned, we have a home visit scheduled with you in May. Is that right?
May the 14th, yes, sir.
Okay. Is there anything else that Mr. Holmes needs to know about the May 14th visit? Has he provided you with the names of anybody else that's in the home?
He has provided me with names of 3 additional persons that live in that home.
Okay. All right. So all we're doing is waiting for the May 14th date then, correct?
Well, that's what I'm doing, to look at the home
Sure.
and
Sure.
see if it's suitable.
Is there any reason at this point that Mr. Holmes can't have some type of, whether it's supervised or unsupervised visits with Charles at a park, at his home for an hour or 2 on a weekend? Would
No,
that
sir,
help?
I cannot do that.
And why?
Mr. Holmes showed up at the last parent-child visit with Miss Campbell, even though they wanted to visit at the same time, even though the restrictions are 1 parent at a time, and Miss Campbell continues to test positive. It's not in the baby's best interest to have access to Miss Campbell unsupervised, and I don't have any confidence that Mr. Holmes will not do that.
So, and I'm making sure I said the correct name, Mr. Holmes. I'm asking for Mr. Holmes. What prevents us from having a visit with his son for an hour or 2 at a park with just Mr. Holmes?
His ability to be protective of Trey,
Okay.
and his mother, Miss Campbell. There's no protective capacity that's been demonstrated.
So testing clean on the last 2 hair follicle tests that go back at least 90 days each, and completing, 5 of 6 programs, that's not showing you some effort on his part, Miss Lee?
He's not protective of the child. He's completed the programs, but his behavior has not changed.
I'll pass the witness, Judge.
Ms. Wagner?
Yes, just a few questions, Your Honor. Ms. Lee, is there a concern that mom is still doing drugs?
Yes, there is. As a matter of fact, it has been reported to the department that Miss Campbell gave birth to another child on April the 10th, and mother and child were both positive for cocaine, and the child was voluntarily relinquished to an outside adoption agency.
Do you know I'm sorry, you might have said already, what drug the mother and child tested positive for?
Cocaine.
Does it cause you concern for Miss Campbell to be around Trey if she's still using drugs?
Yes, it is very concerning.
Does it seem as though the mother and father in this case are still in a relationship?
Yes,
Is that why there's concerns about allowing dad, who is completing services, to have unsupervised access to the child?
yes.
Okay. Ma'am, why is it so important that these parents consistently exercise their weekly visitation?
To build a bond and a relationship with the child.
Okay, and do you think that 3 out of 14 visits is substantial enough contact to establish a relationship with the child?
No.
Would the department like to see explanations as to why these parents are not showing up?
Yes.
Okay. Have either of the parents ever asked you to schedule a visit on a different day?
No, not directly.
And is there anything the child needs right now?
No, his needs are being met.
Okay, I pass the witness.
All right, any other questions for Ms. Lee?
John, I have one follow-up question, if I may.
You may.
Ms. Lee, when you were testifying, you said that dad is not protective of the child. What does dad need to do? What is dad failing to do to show you, to indicate to you that he is not protective for the child?
Yes, ma'am. It is the department's belief that Mr. Holmes and Ms. Campbell are still in a relationship. Ms. Campbell is continuing to use substance abuse. Mr. Campbell knew that Ms. Holmes knew that Ms. Campbell was using cocaine during the time that she had the child in her care before CPS came involved and was not protective. And there has been no noticeable behavior change. He still comes to visits with Ms. Campbell and was doing so during the visits at placement. So I have concerns that he's going to be protective of Charles.
Thank you. That answers my question. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Judge, may I?
You may, Mr. Garvey.
Ma'am, you are aware that part of the reason that the two parties came together was because Miss Campbell did not have transportation?
Sir, what I was told was they wanted to visit at the same time.
But you are aware that there was a time period where Miss Campbell did not have transportation. Is that correct?
It has been stated that she has no transportation. The next time she does have transportation, I'm really not aware of what her transportation situation is at this point in time.
So she never told you that there were time periods she didn't have transportation?
The last conversation I had with Miss Campbell about transportation, her vehicle was going to be fixed in December of 2020.
Okay, so prior to that time, she informed you that she didn't have transportation, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if during that time period she didn't have transportation, she wanted to see her child, she had to get there the best way she could, correct?
Yes.
Okay, in other words, CPS wasn't going to come get her and take her to visitation, was they?
No, sir.
Okay. You are aware that Ms. Campbell had signed up for the domestic violence assessment?
I have not received a report.
They did not send you an email indicating that she was signed up?
I have not received a report.
Did you receive an email saying she was signed up for a BES program?
I do not recall receiving that email.
Okay. And that she has group once a week on Wednesdays?
I do not recall seeing that email. When I receive a report, I will know that she is presenting herself for services.
So if they indicated they sent you an email, that would be incorrect.
No, sir, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I do not recall that specific email at this time.
Okay. Now, Ms. Campbell, even prior to you asking to do parenting classes, was actually doing parenting classes originally, correct?
I do not have a certificate of completion.
That's not what I asked you. I asked you, was she doing the classes? I didn't ask
Sir,
you if she completed the classes.
She has stated that she was attending parenting classes. I did receive an email from a parenting class, but to the best of my knowledge, she has not completed it.
Okay. And she was doing counseling. You said the counselor let her go. Obviously, she may have a different assessment of that, but at any rate, she was at one time doing regular counseling, correct?
Which counselor are you referring to? Individual, family, substance abuse?
I think one of them was a substance abuse counselor.
She was unsuccessfully discharged by the provider.
That's what the provider told you. Did she also
Yes, sir.
register some complaints about the provider?
Not with me, sir.
I would pass the witness, Your Honor.
All right. Anyone else have questions for Ms. Lee?
I have a question, Judge. Ms. Lee, so this case has been going on for a year now, correct?
Yes, sir.
And at the beginning, if I remember correctly, Mr. Holmes was not completing any of the programs or had to go back and redo the programs. Is that correct?
I don't remember him redoing any programs.
Okay. But we weren't matriculating up the field. He was not taking care of his the programs, right?
He didn't have any urgency or consistency in participating in the programs.
Okay. But again, we go back to this has been going on for a year. And Mr. Holmes was not completing the recommendations that you guys had put out for him. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And so here we are, let's say a year later, and in January or February, he tests clean on a hair follicle test. And then again, let's say 2 weeks later, 2 weeks ago, he tests clean again on a hair follicle test. And you've testified that he's completed all but one of the programs. Is that right?
Yes, sir. But he has
And
not
how-
demonstrated a change in behavior.
How is he not demonstrating a change of behavior for you guys when he's completing all of these things and testing clean? How is he not showing you that?
He's not consistent in his visitations. He's
Because
not.
he works.
He's not staying in contact with CPS on a regular basis.
Okay, Miss Lee, you understand that he works. He's a driver, and he gets a job, and he gets what he's supposed to do probably the night before, and he has to work Monday through Friday. Is that right?
I don't know what his working hours are.
Okay. He's told you before that he has to work Monday through Friday and sometimes Saturdays. He makes deliveries. Correct? You know his job.
I know he's a truck driver.
Okay. And if he was not working, you would be upset with him of not working. Correct?
That's not necessarily a true fact.
Okay, so you would be okay with Charles Holmes if he was just staying at home and doing nothing? And
No,
not
sir, but
working?
it's his responsibility to arrange the time to visit with his child. He knows what day and what time it is. It's the same every week.
And he works Monday through Friday.
Yes, sir.
And
a lot of us work.
Your Honor, I'm gonna object. I'm gonna object. Argumentative.
Be overruled. Go ahead, Mr. Longoria.
We moved the visits from a Saturday to accommodate the foster family. So we moved it to a Friday. And yes, we agree and understand that they're every Friday at a certain time. if Mr. Holmes is going to get fired because he misses so many Fridays, how are we holding this against him?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Speculation.
I mean, Ms. Lee can testify. If he was fired, how would that look for the department?
That he could go find another job. I mean, who knows that that's the reason he got fired? If he's a truck driver, there's all kinds of job openings.
I'll pass the witness, Judge.
All right, anything else from Ms. Lee?
Yes, Your Honor, just briefly.
Right.
Ma'am, did you previously state that Dad gave you the names of 3 people who are residing in his home?
He did give me the name of 3 people residing.
Okay, and have you had a chance to run a criminal history check on any of those people yet?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and how is that looking, without being specific?
2 of the household members are fine. There's a 3rd one that has some concerning history.
Okay, is it a situation where we will be able to place Trey in the home with that person residing there?
I would have to staff that, but it's some concerning history. It would involve violence and substance abuse.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee. I pass the witness.
Judge, may I ask her one quick question?
All right, go ahead, Mr. Garvey.
Ma'am, isn't it true that Mr. Holmes told you that one of the persons living with him is his girlfriend?
He actually stated that to CASA, not to myself.
Okay, that one of the persons living with him was his girlfriend.
That has been reported by CASA, yes.
So how in the world are you able to say that him and Miss Campbell still have a relationship if he's living with the woman?
Stranger
Your Honor,
things have happened.
speculation.
Objection sustained.
I have nothing further, Judge.
All right, so Ms. Howard Coroma, who's your next?
Your Honor, I'd like to call the volunteer CASA advocate, please.
You may proceed.
And Ms. Whiteley, how long have you been the volunteer advocate for the Holmes family?
For a year, April 2020.
And since you've been an advocate for them for a substantial period of time, could you give the court a best interest recommendation concerning the child, Charles?
A related adoption.
And do you feel that that is in the best interest of the child, Charles Holmes?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Mr. Garvey?
I got a couple questions for you here. Have you ever visited Miss Campbell's home?
No, sir, I have not.
Have you ever visited Mr. Holmes' home?
Yes, sir, I have.
Okay, part of your job, part of your activity is to go to the environment where the child would be placed, right?
That's correct.
So why in the world haven't you been to Miss Campbell's home? It's been a year.
I don't believe that she's been at that residence for a year. I went by the trailer park last month to try to locate her trailer. And at the time, I didn't have the unit number of her trailer house. So I will be
Did you call her up?
No, I did not call her up. I was driving by.
Okay, but if you're in the area, why didn't you just call her up and say, hey, is it okay for me to come by?
I just didn't do that, sir.
Okay. Well, you know, if before this case is over with, do you have any plans of going by and see her home?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. That's all I have, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Longoria?
No questions, Judge.
All right, and Ms. Wagner?
Thank you. Ma'am, to your knowledge, is mom still testing positive for drugs?
From CPS, yes. From Deborah Lee's reports, yes.
Okay, and could CASA ever advocate for the child to go home with mom if she is testing positive?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and in that instance, is there any point in visiting mom's residence?
Well, I guess on that basis, no, but just because I'm supposed to, just like he's asking me, have you? For formality, I would. But for a point of it, I don't really see a big point in that, but I will do it.
Okay, and thank you. Did you hear Mr. Holmes' father, the father's attorney's request that dad have some sort of unsupervised visit at a park or something of that nature?
I did hear that, yes.
Okay, and what is CASA's stance on that issue?
I don't advise that. I don't think that's a good idea for Trey.
Okay, and ma'am, why is it not a good idea?
Well, I pretty much agree with Deborah Lee that, he and Ms. Campbell obviously have some kind of connection still, whatever relationship it is, other than being the parent of Trey. They have a lot of contact together. And I don't know that if she were to decide to show up, which she might, that he would be able to, or would even try to stop that. She was doing the birthday party, not, just on her own. And I think that I'm not sure Mr. Holmes could stop her from joining if she were to find out.
Okay, so is it fair to say you have concerns that he might allow her to see the child?
Yes.
Do you think it's safe for her to see the child in an unsupervised manner?
No.
Thank you, Sherry. I pass the witness.
Any other questions for Ms. Whiteley?
No, Your Honor, not this council.
So that,
No, Judge.
So Mr. Garvey, do you have any witnesses?
No, Your Honor.
And Mr. Longoria?
I would call Mr. Holmes, Judge.
You may proceed.
I don't see him on my screen, but Charles, you keep up the good work, all right?
I see him on my screen.
All right. That's all I have, Judge.
Okay. And Ms. Wagner, any witnesses?
No witnesses, Your Honor. Your Honor, just kind of posing the question to the group, could mediation be beneficial in this case? Should we at least try before we set a jury trial? That's more directed at the other attorneys.
Judge, I personally wouldn't object to a mediation.
Okay. So we'll look for a trial date, July, August, something like that, and see what we can find. All right, but as far as today is concerned, I'll leave the child where he is and set us to come back on July 20th. Right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else today?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.